On April 15, 1912, John Jacob Astor IV drowned in the North Atlantic Ocean. He was 47 years old and worth $87 million. He died alongside 1,516 other people when the RMS Titanic sank on its maiden voyage. The hotel opened in 1904. Astor died in 1912. The workers who built it have no memorial. Their names appear in no registry. Astor's monument outlasted its creator by 112 years, and counting. His scandalous 18-year-old wife survived the shipwreck. He did not. The fortune he spent on marble from France and chandeliers from Ireland could not buy him a seat in a lifeboat, but it could buy immortality of a different kind. This is the story of the St. Regis Hotel, not the luxury we see today, but the scandals we forgot. Not the celebrities who stayed there, but the laws that were changed to let it exist. Not the fortune it represents, but the fortune it consumed. The St. Regis is the most beautiful hotel in New York. This is what it cost. Before we uncover what really happened behind the golden doors of America's most luxurious hotel, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you're fascinated by the dark histories hidden inside the world's most opulent buildings, hit subscribe so you don't miss our next investigation into wealth, tragedy, and the costs nobody talks about. Chapter 1. The Church and the Law, 5th Avenue and 55th Street in 1900 was the most exclusive residential block in America. Vanderbilt mansions lined the avenue. The 5th Avenue Presbyterian Church stood on the northwest corner, its spire visible for blocks. Private clubs occupied neighboring buildings. This was old money territory, the kind of neighborhood where servants entered through separate doors and carriages waited in the street while their owners took tea. Into this world of careful exclusion, John Jacob Astor IV announced he would build a hotel, not a modest establishment, an 18-story tower, the tallest hotel New York had ever seen. The neighbors objected immediately. The Vanderbilt family did not want an 18-story building blocking light from their mansions. Other residents worried about the character of the neighborhood. Hotels meant strangers. Strangers meant unpredictability. Unpredictability threatened property values and social standing. Astor ignored them. He had purchased a plot measuring 150 feet on 55th Street and 75 feet on 5th Avenue. He acquired an additional 7,500 square feet on 55th Street. The total site covered 20,000 square feet. Construction began in 1901. Within a year, the building stopped rising. Opponents had discovered that Astor's plans included wooden furnishings that had not been properly fireproofed. In an era of frequent hotel fires, this was a legitimate concern and a convenient weapon. Astor fixed the problem. Construction resumed. The neighbors found another approach. They claimed the foundation blasting rattled window panes in their mansions. Cracks appeared in plaster. China fell from shelves. Or so they testified. They filed for an injunction. A judge examined the evidence and overturned their claim. The blasting continued. The church presented a different problem. Astor and his hotel manager, Rudolph Hahn, wanted a liquor license. The hotel had cost $5.5 million. Alcohol sales would help offset that extraordinary sum, but New York state law was specific. Any establishment seeking a liquor license needed approval from owners of 2/3 of all private property within 200 feet. The establishment also had to be at least 200 feet from any church. The 5th Avenue Presbyterian Church sat diagonally across the street from Astor's construction site. Less than 200 feet away, the church objected. A significant number of local property owners joined the objection. Democracy is negotiable when you control a fortune that large. In early 1904, the New York State Legislature passed a bill. The new law required only that churches within a 200-foot radius consent to liquor licenses. Property owners no longer had veto power. The sponsors of this legislation did not attempt to hide their purpose. The law targeted the street. Regis specifically. Everyone understood this. The legislators knew the church would never provide consent. That was acceptable. The law had been changed to Astor's specifications. The church's opinion was now legally irrelevant, but Astor still needed to circumvent the 200-foot requirement. In June 1904, Hahn purchased the house at 697 Fifth Avenue. He relocated the hotel's main entrance from Fifth Avenue to 55th Street. The new entrance was more than 200 feet from the church. The following month, Hahn obtained the liquor license. The church dropped its formal opposition because formal opposition no longer mattered. The law had changed. The entrance had moved. The hotel would serve alcohol. The St. Regis opened on September 4th, 1904. The church remained standing across the street. A permanent witness to its own defeat. Astor had not compromised. He had not negotiated. He had changed the law, purchased a house he did not need, moved an entrance to suit a measurement, and opened his hotel exactly as planned. Power had announced itself. The neighbors learned what opposition cost when it faced the Astor fortune. The law was flexible. The church was irrelevant. The hotel would sell liquor. Within 8 years, Astor would be dead. The hotel would still be serving drinks. Chapter 2. The Man Who Would Build Monuments. John Jacob. Astor IV was born with more money than most nations possessed. He would die in water so cold it stopped men's hearts in minutes. Between birth and death, he built hotels. He was born on July 13, 1864, at Ferncliff, the family estate in Rhinebeck, New York. He was the youngest of 5 children and the only son. His father, William Backhouse Astor, Jr., preferred leisure to business. William spent considerable time aboard the Ambassadress, the world's largest private yacht. His mother, Caroline Webster Schermerhorn, was known simply as Mrs. Astor. She created the 400, a list of exactly 400 people she considered worthy of inclusion in New York society. If you were not on the list, you did not exist in her world. The Astor fortune originated with John Jacob Astor I, a German immigrant who arrived in America and made millions in fur trading. He shifted to Manhattan real estate in the late 1790s and acquired land strategically as the city expanded. Some of that land became Times Square. By the time John Jacob Astor IV inherited his share of the family wealth, the fortune had grown to dimensions that made precise calculation difficult. His fortune in 1912 equaled approximately $2.83 billion today. He was among the wealthiest men in the world. He attended St. Paul's School in New Hampshire and Harvard University. His family called him Jack. Some contemporaries called him Jackass, a nickname that suggested his personality was less than lovable. He had an inventive mind. He patented a bicycle brake in 1898. His pneumatic road improver won a prize at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. He was one of the first Americans to own a motor car. In 1894, he published a science fiction novel titled A Journey in Other Worlds, set in the year 2000. The book envisioned picture telephones, airplanes capable of crossing the Atlantic in a day, electric automobiles, hidden phonographs that police could use to record criminals, and color photography. His predictions were more accurate than anyone expected. He married Ava Lowell Willing in 1891. They had 2 children. William Vincent Astor was born in 1891. Ava Alice Muriel Astor was born in 1902. The marriage lasted 18 years. In 1909, Astor divorced Ava. 2 years later, in 1911, he married Madeleine Talmadge Force. She was 18 years old. He was 47. She was 2 years younger than his son Vincent. New York society was outraged. A man of Astor's age and position marrying a teenager was considered scandalous, even by Gilded Age standards. The couple fled to Europe to escape the gossip. They spent months in Egypt and France. During the trip, Madeleine became pregnant. She wanted their child born in America. In April 1912, they boarded the RMS Titanic in Cherbourg, France. They were returning home. Astor traveled in first class with his pregnant teenage wife, his valet Victor Robbins, Madeleine's maid Rosalie Bidois, Madeleine's nurse Caroline Louise Andre, and their pet Airedale Terrier named Kitty. They were the wealthiest passengers aboard. Before he built the St. Regis, Astor had already established himself in the hotel business. He was part owner of the original Waldorf Astoria Hotel at 5th Avenue and 34th Street. In 1897, he built the Astoria Hotel adjoining his cousin William Waldorf Astor's Waldorf Hotel. The combined property became the Waldorf Astoria, one of New York's most famous addresses. He also built the Knickerbocker Hotel. For that property, he commissioned an 8-foot by 30-foot mural from artist Maxfield Parrish. The painting depicted Old King Cole and cost $5,000. It would later move to the Saint Regis, but in 1906 it hung in the Knickerbocker's bar. When Astor decided to build the St. Regis, he was motivated by geography and ego. The Waldorf Astoria was located 20 blocks south in an area that had begun declining in social importance. The fashionable neighborhoods were moving north toward Central Park. Astor wanted a hotel in the new center of wealth and power. He also wanted to prove he could build something grander than anything his ancestors or his cousin had achieved. At his niece's suggestion, he named the hotel after Upper St. Regis Lake in the Adirondacks. The lake had been named for a 17th-century French Jesuit priest known for hospitality to travelers. The symbolism was intentional. Astor wanted his hotel to represent welcome and luxury in equal measure. He served in the Spanish-American War in 1898. He personally financed a volunteer artillery unit called the Astor Battery. He was appointed a lieutenant colonel and served in Cuba under Major General William Shafter. He allowed his yacht to be used by the government. He was given a brevet promotion to colonel. The military title became part of his public identity. He was Colonel Astor for the rest of his life. In April 1912, John Jacob Astor IV and his pregnant teenage wife boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg, France. They were returning to New York. Madeleine wanted their child born in America. Astor wanted to return to his hotels. He had told reporters that Titanic was unsinkable, a modern shipbuilding miracle. He was wrong about that, as he had been wrong about his marriage being accepted by society. But he was not wrong about his hotels. The St. Regis would outlive him by more than a century. He would not outlive the voyage home. What he built required his fortune to construct. It would require his death to become legendary. Chapter 3. The Tallest Hotel in America. With the law changed and the church defeated, Astor turned his attention to the monument itself. It would be the tallest hotel ever built in New York. It would contain technology no hotel had ever attempted, and it would be constructed by men whose names would never appear in any register. The architectural firm of Trowbridge and Livingston received the commission. Samuel Beck Parkman. Trowbridge had studied at Trinity College in Hartford, then Columbia University, then the American School of Classical Studies in Athens, then the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. Goodhue Livingston came from a distinguished colonial New York family and held degrees from Columbia. They designed the St. Regis in the Beaux-Arts style. The facade would be limestone. The building would rise 18 stories to a height of 267 feet. When completed, it would be the tallest hotel in New York City. The construction firm of Mark Eidlitz and Son built the structure. Workers excavated 3 basement levels down to bedrock approximately 55 feet below street level. The foundation had to support unprecedented weight for a hotel. The loads would be enormous. The bedrock of Manhattan schist could handle it, but the engineering had to be precise. No records document how many workers labored on the St. Regis. No memorial lists their names. No plaque honors their effort. The historical context is clear. Between 1911 and 1912, 1% of all ironworkers in America died on the job. During the 1920s, skyscraper boom, a construction worker died every 33 working hours. In the early 1900s, construction sites were extraordinarily dangerous. Machines and power sources were largely unguarded. Workers understood the risks. They accepted the danger in exchange for employment. When someone fell or was crushed or was burned, the work continued. The building mattered more than the individual. Death was considered an inevitable cost of large projects. The St. Regis was built during this era. Men worked at heights without harnesses or nets. They handled heavy materials with primitive equipment. Some may have been injured. Some may have died. Their names do not appear in hotel records. No families were compensated publicly. The building absorbed whatever happened and moved on. Astor spared no expense on materials or technology. The marble floors and hallways came from quarries in Caen, France. Louis XV furniture was imported from France. Waterford crystal chandeliers arrived from Ireland. Antique tapestries and oriental rugs decorated the public spaces. Astor's personal library of 3,000 leather-bound, gold-tooled books was installed in the hotel for guests to enjoy. 2 burnished bronze entrance doors were commissioned. Rare wood paneling covered walls. Marble fireplaces were installed throughout. The ornamental ceilings featured intricate plasterwork. The technology was revolutionary. The St. Regis was the first hotel in America to place a telephone in every guest room. This was extraordinary in 1904 when most homes did not have telephones. Astor designed an air cooling and ventilation system himself. It cost $300,000. That equals approximately $9.4 million today. The system predated air conditioning, but allowed guests to control the temperature in each room. Air could circulate even with windows and doors closed. The system removed a barrel of dust from the building every day. The stairs leading down to the filtration room were made of marble, because even the basement infrastructure deserved elegance. A centralized vacuum system was installed throughout the hotel. Maids could plug hoses directly into wall sockets on every floor. The dirt was sucked down through tubes to a central collection point. No one had to carry heavy vacuum equipment up and down stairs. The hotel had central heating, a fire alarm system, and mail chutes on every floor. The original ornate mailbox still sits in the lobby. Service pantries on each floor connected to the kitchen via dumbwaiters and pneumatic tubes. Orders could be sent to the kitchen instantly. Food arrived hot at the service pantry, where it was prepared for delivery to guest rooms. When a worker earned $12 per week, Astor spent $1.5 million on furniture. When a comfortable house cost $5,000, Astor spent $300,000 on an air system. The marble came from France, the chandeliers from Ireland, the technology from Astor's inventive mind. The labor came from men whose names we do not know, whose families received no recognition, whose deaths, if there were deaths, were absorbed into the foundation and forgotten. The St. Regis stands. They do not. This is how monuments are built. The materials are imported. The craftsmen are erased. The building endures. The workers disappear. Chapter 4. The Empty Palace. The finest hotel in America opened on September 4th, 1904. Almost nobody could afford to stay there. The design was deliberate. The disaster was not. The opening occurred almost simultaneously with the Hotel Astor, operated by John Jacob Astor's cousin and rival, William Waldorf Astor. Thousands of people had sought invitations to the St. Regis opening night dinner. The press arrived to document the event. Rudolph Hahn, who would manage the hotel for the next 22 years, announced that the St. Regis would serve guests on a first-come, first-served basis. The New York Times declared it the finest hotel in America. Other publications called it the most richly furnished and opulent hotel in the world. Then the problems began. Hahn advertised room rates starting at $5 per day for a salon, bedchamber, and bath. Regular rooms cost $5 to $10 per night. The more expensive suites rented for $14 to $20 per night. These were not extraordinary prices for a luxury hotel, but the press exaggerated wildly. Newspapers reported that one bed in the St. Regis cost $10,000. They claimed a turkey cost $4.50 when most meals cost pennies. Rumors circulated that chambermaids carried their keys on strings of pearls worn around their waists. Town and Country magazine reported that the public believed guests had to spend 2 or 3 figures just on food and a small fortune on rooms. Hahn protested. He called the media coverage a positive injury to business. He said the reports were frightening away millionaires. He was correct. The exaggerated stories scared away everyone except the ultra-wealthy. The St. Regis had been designed for the Astor 400, the elite social group presided over by Carolyn Astor. But even many members of that group found the reported prices intimidating. The hotel that was supposed to attract New York's finest became known as a place too expensive for anyone but robber barons. Critics described the hotel as serving those who were rich and who were or wanted to be fashionable, but who also wanted something quieter and more exclusive than the Waldorf Astoria. The location helped. The street. Regis was close to theaters and stores, but the immediate vicinity remained largely composed of private residences. This was not Times Square or Herald Square. This was the edge of the residential zone that was slowly transforming into commercial space. Guests could walk to shops and entertainment, but return to a neighborhood that felt removed from the chaos of downtown. The hotel's operations were elaborate. Ha'an believed the kitchen was the soul of the hotel. If the kitchen is wrong, all is wrong, he said. The kitchen featured marble floors, tiled walls and ceilings, and glass counters. Nothing perishable was used in the construction. Everything was designed to be easily cleaned. Specialized staff worked at designated stations. The fish cook had his area. The soup cook had his. The roast cook and pastry cook each had their headquarters. Han believed workmen must have fine tools. He equipped the kitchen accordingly. Each floor had a service pantry with dumb waiters and everything necessary to keep food hot while serving dinner in a guest's room. Orders were sent to the kitchen through pneumatic tubes. The system was efficient and modern. Guests could dine in their rooms and receive food as hot as if they were sitting in the restaurant. The St. Regis made a feature of catering to permanent guests who would want to entertain friends at dinner in their private suites. This was a significant advantage over hotels that only offered restaurant dining. By 1910, the hotel had settled into a pattern. The census that year recorded that resident families included piano maker Frederick Steinway and mining heir Daniel Guggenheim. Most had moved from townhouses in Midtown and lived with one or two servants. Their previous residences would have required household staffs of 4 or more. The St. Regis allowed wealthy residents to maintain their standard of living with less personal infrastructure. The hotel provided the servants. The residents simply paid. In 1906, an outdoor restaurant opened on a terrace facing Fifth Avenue. It quickly became popular during the dinner hour. Guests could dine outside while watching Fifth Avenue society. Pass below. The St. Regis was becoming what Astor had envisioned, but slowly. The path from opening disaster to eventual success took years. The hotel had frightened away its intended guests with exaggerated press coverage. It had created an image of inaccessibility that even millionaires found off-putting. Recovery required time and patience. The St. Regis would eventually become what Astor imagined, but not in his lifetime. And not because his vision was sound, because history gave the hotel what he could not provide: time and the reputation that comes from survival. In 1904, the St. Regis was an expensive failure that frightened away its intended guests. By 1912, it had become something different, a symbol of an era, a structure that would outlast its creator. But Astor would not witness that transformation complete. 8 years after the hotel opened, he would board a ship that promised to be as revolutionary as his hotel. The ship would sink. The hotel would not. Chapter 5. The Unsinkable. The ship was 882 feet long. The iceberg was larger. The collision occurred at 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912. The ship sank at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th. Between collision and sinking, 2 hours and 40 minutes passed. Not enough time to save over 1,500 people. Enough time to know you were going to die. John Jacob Astor IV had boarded the RMS Titanic on April 10, 1912 in Cherbourg, France. He traveled via the tender SS Nomadic to the ship anchored offshore. He was in first class. His companions were his wife Madeleine, who was 5 months pregnant, his valet Victor Robbins, Madeleine's maid Rosalie Bidois, Madeleine's nurse Caroline Louise André, and their pet Airedale Terrier Kitty. His wealth exceeded the combined fortunes of most other first-class passengers. He had told reporters before boarding that Titanic was unsinkable, a modern shipbuilding miracle. He believed technology had conquered the ocean. On April 14th at 11:40 p.m., Titanic struck an iceberg on its starboard side. The impact tore open the hull below the waterline. Water flooded the forward compartments. Astor was among the first passengers to understand the ship was sinking. He woke his sleeping pregnant wife and told her to dress in her warmest clothes. He put all of their jewelry on her. Diamonds, pearls, everything valuable went onto Madeleine's body. Then he took her to the deck. The evacuation was chaotic, but followed protocol. Women and children first. Astor helped Madeleine into Lifeboat 4 at 1:55 a.m. She clung to him. She did not want to leave. He reportedly told her the sea was calm and she would be all right. She was in good hands. He would see her in the morning. He also helped Ida Sophia Hippasch and her 17-year-old daughter, Jean Gertrude, into the boat. He assisted. 11-year-old Elias Nicola Yared and his 14-year-old sister, Jamelia. When the boat was nearly full, Astor asked Second Officer Lightoller if he could join his wife due to her delicate condition. Lightoller said no. Only women and children were allowed in the boats. Men had to wait. Astor stepped back from the lifeboat without argument. Lifeboat 4 was lowered at 1:55 a.m. Witnesses later reported that Astor stood on deck with John B. Thayer, Harry Elkins Widener, and Arthur Ryerson. They waved to the lifeboats descending toward the water. Some accounts claim Astor spent his final minutes trying to free his dog Kitty from the ship's kennels. Whether this is true cannot be verified. What is certain is that at 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the RMS Titanic sank. John Jacob Astor IV went down with the ship. So did his valet Victor Robbins. So did Kitty. More than 1,500 passengers and crew perished in the sinking. Only 333 bodies were ever recovered. On April 22nd, the cable ship Mackay Bennett found Astor's body floating in the North Atlantic. He was identified by the initials sewn into his jacket and the engraved pocket watch in his pocket. The watch bore the initials JJA. His body was delivered to N. Biddle and forwarded to New York on May 1, 1912. He was buried at Trinity Church Cemetery in Manhattan. Madeleine Astor survived, along with her maid and nurse. In August 1912, 4 months after her husband's death, she gave birth to their son. She named him John Jacob Astor VI. Newspapers called him the Titanic baby. He was a posthumous child born into a fortune he would never fully inherit. Astor's will left the bulk of his $85 million estate to his first son, Vincent. Vincent inherited $69 million, the Ferncliff estate, and the yacht Noma. The St. Regis Hotel, valued at $2.675 million, became Vincent's property. Madeleine received $100,000 as an outright bequest. She received a $5 million trust fund that provided her with income. She was given use of the mansion at 840 Fifth Avenue and all its furnishings. She could use the Newport mansion called Beechwood and all its furnishings. She could choose any luxury limousine from Astor's collection. She could have 5 of his prized horses. But all of this came with a condition. If she remarried, she would lose everything except the $100,000. The trust would end. The houses would revert to Vincent. The horses and cars would be taken back. The posthumous son, John Jacob Astor VI, received only a small portion of his father's estate. Most of the fortune went to Vincent, who was 20 years old when his father died. Vincent dropped out of Harvard and suddenly found himself responsible for a $150 million real estate portfolio. He owned the St. Regis. He owned other properties across Manhattan. He had become one of the wealthiest young men in America overnight. The transition was not something he had prepared for. His father had been 47 and in good health. No one expected him to die. The ship was unsinkable. The voyage was supposed to be routine. John Jacob Astor IV built the St. Regis to prove he could create something grander than his ancestors had achieved. He succeeded. The hotel would stand for more than a century. He lived 8 years after it opened. The hotel required his fortune to build. It required his death to become legendary. The St. Regis was no longer just a hotel where the rich stayed. It was the building that outlived the Titanic's wealthiest victim. That association would define the hotel for decades. The man who built it died on the most famous ship in history. The hotel he built still stands at 2 East 55th Street. $87 million could not buy a seat in a lifeboat, but it could buy a building that would outlast everyone who knew his name. Chapter 6. The Son's Revenge. Vincent Astor inherited a fortune worth $150 million. His father had died in the most famous shipwreck in history. He was 20 years old, a Harvard dropout, and he had just inherited the tallest hotel in New York. He sold it 15 years later. He would spend the rest of his life regretting it. Vincent was not prepared to manage a hotel empire. He had grown up wealthy, but had never run a business. His father had managed the properties. Vincent had studied at Harvard with no particular career in mind, beyond managing the family money eventually. Now eventually had arrived 40 years too early. The St. Regis required attention. It required daily oversight. It required someone who understood the hotel business and cared about maintaining the standards his father had established. Vincent was immersed in other real estate ventures. He had inherited buildings across Manhattan. The St. Regis was one property among many. It was not his priority. In May 1921, hotel manager Rudolf Hahn announced plans to build an 18-story annex with 150 rooms east of the existing hotel. The expansion never happened. Vincent had already begun considering selling the property. William Rockefeller had purchased the house at 12 East 55th Street, immediately east of the hotel, in October 1904. Rockefeller already owned the houses at 3 through 9 East 54th Street, which blocked any southward expansion. The St. Regis was landlocked. Vincent could not expand it even if he wanted to. Rockefeller's purchases may have been strategic. Preventing the hotel from growing would limit its value and potentially harm its business. Whether Rockefeller intended this or simply wanted the properties for other reasons is unclear. The effect was the same. The St. Regis could not expand. In 1924, Rockefeller's houses on 54th and 55th Streets were finally sold. The new owners had no interest in preventing hotel expansion. But by then, Vincent had decided to sell. In 1925, the St. Regis installed stores along its Fifth Avenue frontage. This generated additional revenue, but also signaled that the hotel was maximizing income from its existing footprint, rather than expanding. In 1927, Vincent sold the St. Regis to Benjamin Newton Duke of the Duke Management Company. The Duke family had made their fortune in tobacco. They had money and experience running businesses. The sale price was not disclosed publicly. Duke Management immediately commissioned architects Sloan and Robertson to design an addition on the east end along 55th Street. The expansion nearly doubled the hotel's size to 540 rooms. It added a rooftop ballroom and nightclub called the St. Regis Roof. It added the Salle Cathay, a room with Chinese decor. The addition increased the building's height from 18 to 20 stories. The architects matched the style of the original 1904 building closely. The expansion looked like it had always been there. In 1932, the Old King Cole mural by Maxfield Parrish was moved from the Racquet and Tennis Club to the St. Regis. The painting had originally hung in Astor's Knickerbocker Hotel. When that hotel closed, the mural had been stored at the club. Now it came to the St. Regis, where it was made the centerpiece of a new bar area. In 1934, a bartender named Fernand Petiot invented a cocktail he called the Red Snapper. It mixed vodka, tomato juice, and spices. The drink is now known worldwide as the Bloody Mary. Petiot's creation would become one of the most famous cocktails in history. The St. Regis could claim to be its birthplace, but the Duke era was not successful. By the early 1930s, Benjamin Duke had allowed the hotel to lose its sparkle. Maintenance was deferred, standards slipped. The Great Depression had destroyed the luxury hotel market. Companies were not expanding. Wealthy individuals were conserving resources. Nobody needed expensive hotel rooms. The St. Regis, like other luxury properties, struggled to fill its rooms. Duke Management could not maintain the $5 million mortgage that had been held by the Astor estate. In 1934, they defaulted. An acrimonious dispute followed. Vincent Astor saw an opportunity. The hotel his father had built was available at a fraction of its value. The Depression had destroyed the market, but Vincent understood something the Dukes did not. The St. Regis was not valuable because it generated profit in 1935. It was valuable because it was the St. Regis. The name mattered. The history mattered. The association with his father, who had died as the wealthiest man on the Titanic, mattered. The building was a monument. Monuments do not lose value because times are hard. They increase in value as time passes. After a lengthy court battle, Vincent bought the hotel back from Mary Duke Biddle in May 1935. The purchase price was $300,000. The hotel had been valued at $2.675 million when Vincent inherited it in 1912. He had sold it to the Dukes for an undisclosed sum that was certainly higher than that in 1927. Now he was buying it back for $300,000. That was approximately 11% of its 1912 valuation. Vincent had sold his father's legacy for money he did not need. Now he had bought it back for almost nothing. Vindication, not profit, motivated the purchase. Within 2 years, he would make it profitable again. The son would succeed where he had previously failed. He would restore what his father had built. And he would prove that selling it had been the only mistake he needed to correct. Chapter 7. Resurrection. Vincent Astor paid $300,000 for a hotel worth millions. He spent the next 2 years proving he was right. By 1937, the St. Regis was profitable. By 1940, it was legendary. By 1959, when Vincent died, it was irreplaceable. Vincent's strategy was immediate and comprehensive. He hired his brother-in-law, Prince Serge Obolensky, to join the executive board and add what Vincent called social excitement. Obolensky was a Russian prince who had been a page boy at the Tsar's court before escaping the revolution. He had married Vincent's half-sister, Ava Alice Muriel Astor. His aristocratic credentials and social connections made him valuable for attracting the right clientele. Vincent hired Mrs. Anne Tiffany to redecorate the hotel. He convinced Monsieur Castebert to leave the renowned chef Henri Soule and become the St. Regis chef. These were calculated moves to restore the hotel's reputation for excellence. Vincent installed air conditioning in more than 250 rooms. He reused the original ventilation ducts from his father's 1904 air cooling system. The infrastructure was still there. It simply needed updating. The renovation respected what Astor had built while adding modern amenities. The hotel needed to compete with newer properties that had been built with air conditioning from the start. Vincent understood that maintaining historical character meant nothing if guests were uncomfortable. The repeal of Prohibition in 1933 had come at the perfect time for Vincent's plans. The restaurant business at the St. Regis increased by 300% between 1935 and 1937. People wanted to drink legally in elegant surroundings. The St. Regis offered both. The King Cole Bar was established in 1935 with the Maxfield Parrish mural as its centerpiece. The mural hung on the north wall of a wood-paneled room adjacent to the lobby. A sign above the doorway read in Latin, "I would like to die in a tavern and be given a sip of wine. Then I could sing happily with the angels. May God be kind to the drinker." The bar became a New York institution almost immediately. The Iridium Room opened in October 1936. It became one of New York's most glamorous dine-and-dance spots. The room featured an ice skating platform that rolled out from under the orchestra floor. Dorothy Lewis was the featured skater. Emil Coleman's band played. The Vernon Castles and Tony and Sally DeMarco were among the celebrated dance teams associated with the venue. The Iridium Room represented everything the 1930s wanted in nightlife: elegance, entertainment, and spectacle combined in one space. The room remained open until 1948, when it closed due to federal excise taxes on live hotel entertainment and declining demand. The Seaglades Room was transformed into the Maisonette Russe, a popular supper nightclub. The Annex's roof garden reopened in May 1936 as a Viennese-style garden. It remained relatively popular through the late 1950s, though by 1959 it was only open 5 days per week. Vincent had created multiple revenue streams within the hotel. Guests could dine, dance, drink, and sleep all within the same building. The St. Regis became a destination rather than simply a place to stay. The hotel attracted permanent and semi-permanent residents who treated it as home. Salvador Dalí and his wife Gala lived at the St. Regis every fall and winter for decades. Accounts vary on whether this began in 1934 or 1966, but Dalí's association with the hotel lasted approximately 40 years. His favorite room was 1610. He arrived each season with theatrical flair. He brought his pet ocelot, Babu, on a leash. He announced himself by crying Dalí as he entered the lobby. Guests and staff knew when Dalí had returned for the season. He treated the hotel as his stage and performed accordingly. The management tolerated his eccentricities because his presence added to the hotel's mystique. Marlene Dietrich maintained an apartment at the St. Regis. William Paley, the chief executive of CBS, and his wife Babe also kept an apartment there. These were not transient guests. They were residents who could afford any residence in New York, but chose the St. Regis. The hotel offered services and discretion that even the wealthiest private homes could not match. Nikola Tesla had resided at the hotel in 1922. The tradition of brilliant, eccentric, and famous long-term residents became part of the hotel's identity. Vincent made the St. Regis financially profitable within 2 years of buying it back. The renovations were completed in June 1937 at a cost of $500,000. That investment paid for itself quickly. The hotel that had been struggling under Duke management was now thriving under Vincent's control. In 1938, the general manager, Stack, resigned. Vincent replaced him with someone more aligned with his vision. Brand Chatillon, a jewelry company, moved into the hotel in 1940, occupying the basement and parts of the first and second floors. Every square foot of the building was generating revenue. Vincent Astor died in February 1959 at age 67. He had owned the Saint Regis twice, sold it once, bought it back for a fraction of its value, and transformed it into one of New York's most profitable hotels. He had dedicated much of his later life to philanthropy through the Vincent Astor Foundation, which he established in 1948. The foundation's purpose was the alleviation of human misery. Vincent gave away substantial portions of his fortune to educational institutions, healthcare initiatives, and social programs. His death left the St. Regis without the steady hand that had guided it for 24 years. The problem was immediate. Vincent had been the only person with access to the hotel's bank accounts. When he died, the hotel's assets were essentially frozen. The executors of his estate quickly filed his will for probate to allow the hotel's expenses to continue being paid. But the uncertainty had begun. Within a year, the St. Regis would be sold. Within 6 years, it would change hands 5 times. Chapter 8. The Carousel. In February 1959, Vincent Astor died. In February 1960, the St. Regis was sold. In April 1960, it was sold again. By early 1966, the hotel had changed hands at least 5 times. Nobody could keep track of who owned it. Panic had replaced stability. William Zeckendorf of Webb and Knapp expressed interest in acquiring the St. Regis from Vincent's estate almost immediately. Zeckendorf was a prominent real estate developer who understood the value of trophy properties. By early 1960, he had beaten out more than 20 other bidders for the rights to purchase the hotel. In February 1960, Zeckendorf and Prince Serge Obolensky, who now worked at the Zeckendorf Corporation, agreed to buy the St. Regis for $14 million. They paid $5 million in cash and assumed a $9 million mortgage. The deal closed. Zeckendorf owned the St. Regis. He held it for approximately 2 months. In April 1960, Webb and Knapp agreed to sell the hotel building to the Qatar Corporation. Qatar took title to the property in May 1960. They leased the St. Regis back to Webb and Knapp, who continued operating it. Qatar held the building through the early 1960s. Then ownership changed again. Cesar Balsa, a Spanish-born Mexican hotel mogul who owned many other hotel properties, took control. Balsa operated the hotel briefly. Details of his tenure are sparse, which suggests the period was unremarkable or deliberately forgotten. After Balsa, the hotel went through 3 additional owners in quick succession. Their names are not consistently recorded in historical accounts. Each ownership lasted shorter than the last. The rapid changes created instability. Guests noticed. Staff worried about their futures. The hotel's reputation began to suffer. Luxury hotels require consistency. Service standards depend on institutional memory. Staff who have worked together for years develop rhythms and protocols that cannot be quickly replicated. Every ownership change disrupted those rhythms. New owners brought new priorities. Managers were replaced. Standards shifted. The St. Regis remained physically beautiful, but the operational excellence that Vincent had cultivated was deteriorating. The hotel that had been stable for decades became unstable within years. Nobody profited significantly from the rapid sales. Each owner bought, hoping to capitalize on the St. Regis name, and discovered that owning an iconic property did not automatically generate profits. The hotel industry was changing. Competition was increasing. Newer hotels had been built with modern systems and did not carry the maintenance burden of a building constructed in 1904. The St. Regis was aging. Its infrastructure needed attention. Its mechanical systems required updating. These were expensive problems that short-term owners were unwilling to address. In February 1966, Sheraton Hotels purchased the St. Regis for an undisclosed sum. The carousel stopped. The hotel had stable ownership for the first time since Vincent Astor's death 7 years earlier. Sheraton renamed it the St. Regis Sheraton. The company understood that buying the hotel was only the beginning. Someone would have to invest in restoring it to competitive condition. The question was whether Sheraton had the patience and resources to do what was necessary. The 7 years of instability had taken their toll. The hotel was aging, the infrastructure was failing. The competition was newer, more modern, better equipped. The St. Regis was still the St. Regis, but reputation alone might not be enough anymore. Chapter 9. Closing the Golden Doors. On a day in 1988, the exact date is not recorded, which itself tells you something. The St. Regis Hotel closed its golden doors for the first time in 84 years. The building that had survived the death of its creator, the sinking of the Titanic, the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and 7 ownership changes in 7 years, finally shut down. Not because it was failing, because it had to be saved. Sheraton Hotels had owned the street. Regis since 1966. They renamed it the St. Regis Sheraton and provided the stability the hotel desperately needed. In 1977, Sheraton conducted a complete remodel. Details of that renovation are limited, but the fact that it occurred indicates Sheraton recognized the building required updating. Through the 1970s and into the 1980s, the hotel maintained its reputation. Salvador Dalí and Gala continued their winter residencies until 1973. Celebrity guests continued arriving. The hotel remained a symbol of New York luxury, but beneath the surface, the infrastructure was aging. By the late 1980s, the hotel's mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems were failing. Decades of continuous operation had taken their toll. The systems were either original from 1904 or dated from various renovation periods. None were adequate for a modern luxury hotel. Guests expected reliable climate control, consistent water pressure, and electrical systems that could handle hair dryers, televisions, and other appliances. The St. Regis could barely provide these basics. The hotel was competing with newer properties that had been built with modern systems from the start. Guests were willing to pay premium prices for the St. Regis name, but not if the experience was inferior to hotels built in the 1970s and 80s. Sheraton faced a decision: continue operating a deteriorating property and watch its reputation slowly erode, or close the hotel for a complete restoration and risk permanent damage to its standing. Closing meant relocating all guests. It meant laying off or reassigning staff temporarily. It meant no revenue for months or potentially years. The financial risk was enormous, but continuing as things were meant inevitable decline. Sheraton chose restoration. In 1988, the St. Regis was also declared a New York City designated landmark by the New York Landmarks Preservation Foundation. Some sources indicate it had received landmark status as early as 1965. But the 1988 designation was definitive. The landmark status meant the facade and historic interiors were protected. Any changes would require approval from preservation authorities. The hotel could not be demolished. It could not be substantially altered. This was both protection and constraint. The building was now officially recognized as historically significant, which meant restoration would be complicated and expensive. The hotel closed. Every guest was relocated. The staff was sent home or reassigned. The building was emptied. Then the work began. The restoration cost $100 million. The scope was total. Every mechanical and electrical system was replaced. New HVAC, new plumbing, new electrical infrastructure. The hotel received state-of-the-art systems throughout. New meeting rooms were constructed on the 2nd and 20th floors. The room count was reduced from 557 rooms to 365 rooms, a reduction of 40%. The remaining rooms were made substantially more spacious and luxurious. Designer suites were created, including the Tiffany Suite, the Christian Dior Suite, and the Orient Suite. Astor Court was created to replace the original Palm Court. It was designed as a double-height tea room with trompe-l'oeil ceiling clouds that recalled the original 1904 design. The lobby was meticulously restored. The floors recalled the original 1904 flooring. Italian marble was preserved or replaced where damaged. Gold leaf cornices were restored. Vaulted ceilings were maintained. The King Cole Bar was restored, and the Maxfield Parrish mural was cleaned and conserved. Wood paneling was preserved. The hotel brought in resources, materials, and furnishings from more than 15 countries. 13 different types of marble were used in the restoration. New facilities were added. L'Espinasse, a restaurant featuring French cuisine, was introduced. A spa, fitness club, salon, and business center were built. These were amenities that modern luxury hotels required. The Saint. Regis had to compete not just on history and reputation, but on contemporary service standards. Guests expected these facilities. Without them, the hotel would be seen as charming but outdated. The restoration balanced historical preservation with modern functionality. The result was a building that looked as it had in 1904, but operated like it had been built in 1991. The hotel reopened in September 1991 as the St. Regis, dropping the Sheraton name. Jacqueline Astor Drexel, John Jacob Astor's granddaughter, shared the ribbon-cutting ceremony with Mayor David Dinkins. A dinner dance benefit for the New York Landmarks Preservation Fund marked the reopening. Attendees included numerous ambassadors, Barbara Walters, Jeffrey Bean, and Bill Blass. The event announced that the St. Regis was not just reopening, it was reclaiming its position as the most luxurious hotel in New York. The St. Regis reopened in September 1991 as the most luxurious hotel in New York. It had cost $5.5 million to build in 1904. It had cost $100 million to save in 1991. The second cost was 20 times the first, but the second cost was not optional. The building had survived by closing. This is what preservation means, not keeping things as they were, but spending whatever it takes to prevent them from disappearing. The hotel that John Jacob Astor built would not be allowed to fail. It would be updated, modernized, and restored, and it would continue operating as if it had never closed at all. Chapter 10. The Empire. In 1904, John Jacob Astor IV built one hotel. In 1998, Starwood Hotels and Resorts turned that hotel into 40. The St. Regis was no longer a place. It was a promise. You could stay at the St. Regis in New York, or Aspen, or Bora Bora, or Rome, or Beijing. The name had become more valuable than the building. Starwood acquired Sheraton from ITT in 1997. The following year, Starwood acquired the St. Regis New York and made it the flagship of a new ultra-luxury brand. The strategy was clear. The St. Regis name carried weight. It meant something to travelers worldwide. It represented history, luxury, innovation, and exclusivity. Starwood could apply that name to other properties and instantly elevate their status. The original hotel was renamed the St. Regis New York to differentiate it from the expanding chain. The first expansion was the St. Regis Aspen, a former Ritz-Carlton property that Starwood rebranded in 1998. Then came the Carlton Hotel in Washington, D.C., rebranded as a St. Regis in 1999. The St. Regis San Francisco followed. Starwood rebranded former Ritz-Carlton properties in Houston and Philadelphia as St. Regis Hotels. Each property received the St. Regis treatment. 24-hour butler service, signature Bloody Mary cocktails, rituals borrowed from the original New York hotel. The brand expanded to more than 40 properties worldwide. St. Regis Hotels opened in Shenzhen, Bora Bora, the Maldives, Dubai, and dozens of other locations. In 2006, floors 8 through 11 of the St. Regis New York were converted to residential condominiums. The St. Regis residences consisted of 24 full ownership condominiums and 24 fractional ownership timeshare condominiums, called the Residence Club. The building became a hybrid. Hotel guests occupied most floors. Residents owned or timeshared others. Fractional ownership allowed buyers to purchase 28 days per year. for prices starting around $389,000. That worked out to approximately $5,900 per day. It was an expensive proposition, but it came with the St. Regis name and all the services the hotel provided. In 2013, the hotel underwent another major renovation. This one cost $90 million. HDC Design and Stonehill Taylor Architects conducted a gut renovation of all hotel rooms and most public spaces. A new restaurant and gym were added. The renovation preserved the historic character while modernizing every system and surface. Only 13 years had passed since the last major renovation in 1991, but luxury hotel standards had evolved. Guests expected higher levels of technology, comfort, and service. The St. Regis had to keep pace. In 2014, the retail portion of the hotel facing Fifth Avenue was sold to Vornado Realty Trust for $700 million. This included the adjacent townhouse that Astor had bought in 1904 to circumvent the liquor license law. The retail space was now more valuable than the hotel operations in that specific location. Separating retail from hotel operations allowed each to be optimized independently. In September 2016, Marriott International acquired Starwood in a $13.6 billion transaction that reshaped the global hospitality industry. Marriott gained the St. Regis brand and all its properties. The St. Regis New York became Marriott managed. It was integrated into the Marriott Bonvoy Rewards program while maintaining its Forbes 5-star and AAA 5-diamond ratings. Marriott understood the value of the St. Regis name. The brand represented the pinnacle of luxury in Marriott's portfolio. On October 31, 2019, the Qatar Investment Authority purchased the St. Regis New York building from Marriott for $310 million. That worked out to approximately $1.3 million per key. The QIA bought the building, but not the brand or management contract. Marriott continues to manage the hotel under a long-term agreement. The QIA's strategy was to acquire trophy assets in major cities worldwide. They had previously purchased the St. Regis Rome in 2014 for approximately $151 million, and the St. Regis San Francisco in 2016 for $175 million. The QIA had announced plans to invest $35 billion in the United States over 5 years, starting in 2015. The St. Regis New York was part of that investment strategy. Today, the St. Regis New York is owned by Qatar, managed by Marriott, and visited by millions who will never know its history. The hotel that John Jacob Astor IV built to prove he could rival Europe's finest has become a franchise. There are St. Regis hotels in Shenzhen, Bora Bora, the Maldives, and Dubai. The original still stands at 2 East 55th Street, but it is no longer unique. It is simply the first. The name survived by multiplying. The building survived by becoming one of many. One hotel became 60. One building became a brand. The structure that cost $5.5 million to build sold for $310 million. That is what happens when a building outlives its creator by 112 years. It stops being his monument. It becomes everyone's asset. Chapter 11. What the Golden Doors Conceal. Walk into the St. Regis Hotel today, and you will see marble from France, chandeliers from Ireland, a Maxfield Parrish mural worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. You will not see the names of the men who installed that marble. You will not see a plaque honoring the workers who hung those chandeliers. You will not see any mention of deaths that occurred during construction, because there is no memorial. There never was. No documented construction deaths exist for the St. Regis from its 1901 through 1904 construction period. This absence does not prove no one died. It proves no one recorded the deaths or no one considered them worth recording. The historical context is clear. Between 1911 and 1912, 1% of all iron workers in America died on the job. During the 1920s, a construction worker died every 33 working hours. In the early 1900s, construction was extraordinarily dangerous. Machines and power sources were largely unguarded. Falls from height were common. Crush injuries from heavy materials were routine. Workers understood the risks. They accepted the danger in exchange for employment. When someone died, the work continued. The building mattered more than the individual. The absence of documentation suggests erasure rather than absence of tragedy. Standard practice in that era was to pay families quietly and move on. Bad publicity harmed a building's reputation and its owner's standing. The St. Regis was John Jacob Astor's monument. He wanted it associated with luxury and innovation, not with death and danger. Workers who died were obstacles to that narrative. They disappeared from the record. No memorial in the lobby lists their names. No plaque in the building acknowledges their labor. The hotel records preserve the names of architects, designers, managers, and owners. The workers exist only as an expense line in budgets that no longer survive. Madeleine Force Astor survived the Titanic and gave birth to John Jacob Astor, the sixth, in August 1912. She inherited a $100,000 bequest and a $5 million trust fund that provided income. She received use of mansions and horses and cars, but all of it came with conditions. If she remarried, she would lose almost everything. In 1916, 4 years after her husband's death, Madeleine married William Vincent Dick, a childhood friend. She lost the income from the trust. She lost the use of the mansions. She kept only the $100,000. She had 2 more sons with Dick. In 1933, she married boxer Enzo Fiormonte. Her son Jakey strongly opposed the marriage and accused his mother of poor judgment. They reconciled eventually, but the damage lingered. Madeleine died decades after the Titanic, no longer wealthy, no longer an Astor. History remembers her as the Titanic widow or the teenage bride, not as herself. She traded the Astor fortune for personal happiness. Whether she considered it a fair trade cannot be known. What is certain is that she chose love over money twice and paid for it both times. The St. Regis continued operating throughout her life. The hotel her husband built outlasted her by decades. She is not commemorated anywhere in the building. Her husband's name appears in histories of the hotel, but hers does not. She was an accessory to his story, not a character in her own right. John Jacob Astor VI, called Jakey, was born 4 months after his father died. He was the Titanic baby, the posthumous son, the child who would never know his father. He received only a small portion of his father's estate. Most went to his half-brother Vincent. Jakey grew up knowing he had been cheated of his birthright. Vincent despised him. Vincent believed, or claimed to believe, that Jakey was not a biological Astor. When Vincent died in 1959, he left Jakey nothing in his will. Jakey sued Vincent's widow, Roberta Brooke Russell, claiming Vincent had been mentally incompetent due to alcoholism when signing the will. Jakey accused Brooke of using liquor to influence Vincent in her favor. The legal battle lasted months. Jakey settled for $250,000, about $2.7 million in today's dollars. The rest of the fortune went to the Vincent Astor Foundation and Brooke. Jakey died feeling cheated, believing he had been denied what was legally, if not morally, his. The St. Regis, which had been worth $2.675 million when his father died, had been sold and repurchased and sold again. Jakey never owned it. He inherited nothing from the monument his father built. The hotel has no documented suicides from its windows or roof. Unlike the Empire State Building, no catastrophic events like plane crashes or fires killed dozens at once. The deaths at the St. Regis were quieter. Guests who died of natural causes in rooms over 120 years. Heart attacks, strokes, old age. These deaths went unrecorded publicly. The hotel cleaned the rooms and rented them again. Death is bad for business. Hotels prefer discretion. The building erases ordinary death as thoroughly as it erased worker deaths. In 1934, bartender Fernand Petiot invented the Red Snapper cocktail, now known as the Bloody Mary. It became the signature drink at all 60-plus St. Regis properties worldwide. Petiot's name is preserved because he created something profitable. The invention generates revenue. The hotel celebrates it. Petiot is remembered. The workers who built the bar where the drink was invented are forgotten. Pattern. Creation is rewarded when it generates revenue. Labor is erased when it does not. The Maxfield Parrish mural has its own legends. Some claim the face of King Cole in the painting is actually John Jacob Astor's face. Others claim the king's mischievous expression exists because he just passed gas. The mural has been restored multiple times, in 1957 and 2007. It has mythology, it has preservation, it has recognition. The workers who installed it in the wall have none of those things. The Saint. Regis cost $5.5 million to build in 1904. That equals approximately $172 million today. It cost $100 million to restore in 1991. It cost $90 million to renovate in 2013. It sold for $310 million in 2019. Room rates currently begin at $2,000 per night. The cost never calculated is human lives, worker deaths, family tragedies absorbed into the foundation. The building remembers what profits. The building forgets what costs. The St. Regis Hotel is 120 years old. It has survived everything. It has forgotten everyone. The marble remains. The chandeliers shine. The Maxfield Parrish mural hangs above the bar where the Bloody Mary was invented. The golden doors still open, but they open only for those who can pay. And they conceal what payment cost. The hotel is a monument. Monuments require sacrifice. The St. Regis required workers, fortunes, lives, marriages, inheritances, and a century of forgetting. What it required, it received. What it owes, it will never pay. This is luxury. This is cost. This is America. John Jacob Astor IV died on April 15, 1912. The St. Regis Hotel opened on September 4, 1904. 8 years separated the opening from his death. 112 years separate his death from today. The monument outlasted the man by 14 times the length of his ownership. The hotel stands at 2 East 55th Street, New York, New York, 10022. It is open to the public for dining at Astor Court. The King Cole Bar accepts walk-ins subject to availability. Afternoon tea is served daily. Room rates begin at $2,000 per night. Butler service is included. The hotel holds Forbes 5-star and AIAA 5-diamond ratings. It is owned by the Qatar Investment Authority. It is managed by Marriott International. The Maxfield Parrish mural is visible from the bar. The original 1904 mailbox remains in the lobby. The marble floors are from France. The chandeliers are from Ireland. The workers are from nowhere. They have no names. They left no trace. The St. Regis Hotel is the most beautiful monument to American wealth in New York City. It represents everything the Gilded Age believed, that enough money could buy beauty, technology, immortality, and the right to change laws. It was correct. John Jacob Astor IV built the finest hotel in America. He died 8 years later in the most famous shipwreck in history. His hotel stands. His workers are forgotten. His family fought over his inheritance for 50 years. His monument outlasted everything. This is what monuments do. They stand, they endure. They survive everyone who built them, everyone who owned them, everyone who died creating them. The St. Regis won. It always wins. That is what monuments are for. If you visit the St. Regis, look at the marble, look at the chandeliers, look at the mural, then ask yourself who installed them. The building cannot answer. It has forgotten. This is the dark story of New York's most luxurious hotel, not the triumph we celebrate, the cost we forgot.